does put a little countdown on the screen. So that's my... Hello, welcome to Financial Insider Weekly. I'm your host, Michael Gray, CPA. My guest today is attorney Naomi Comfort, and she's with Hawks and Comfort LLP.
Correct?
Got it. And you're in Los Altos?
Yes.
Yes. So we're in Silicon Valley here in California, San Jose, California, for those of you who are watching outside the area. And so today, we're going to get started a little bit here, introducing our topic. We're talking about the Healthcare Reform Bill. It was passed by Congress earlier in 2010. Today is December 14th, which is actually going to be kind of an important day in our history. We're looking back on this particular legislation. We'll talk about it in a moment. Anyway, this healthcare bill is the most complex and comprehensive legislation addressing our nation's healthcare policy since the enactment of Medicare and Medicaid in 1965. So that's for like 45 years, long time. And although the legislation is commented on regularly by pundits and the media, it's difficult to get the facts from those resources, to get all the details about how this all works. And there's a lot of confusion about it. I mean, a lot of people are scared about this and angry. So we may be able to talk about some of those points today. Anyway, the media spends the bulk of the time expressing opinions about whether the legislation and various aspects for it are good or bad, and they don't really explain the content and how this legislation impacts various groups. So Naomi has been studying this and speaking on it quite a bit. She's going to give us a better picture of what healthcare reform means to us as consumers, business owners, and taxpayers. Naomi is an elder law and estate planning attorney, and she, as I said, has a practice in Los Altos, has worked in this field for 12 years. No, it's somebody else. It's just 2 years, wasn't it? One. Anyway, and she's a frequent lecturer on this and other topics related to elder care, estate planning, and tax issues, including sharing the stage with yours truly. Anyway, so Naomi...
For the third time.
For the third time on this show, yes. Thank you so much for being with me again today, Naomi. Pleasure to have you. All right. So before we even start, well, first of all, let me sort of cue people again or remind you. Some of this is going to be peculiar from state to state.
Correct.
So I'll remind you about that. There is going to be regulations and other things that are going to come into effect that's going to detail a lot of this out, so we don't really have questions to many answers yet.
Or answers
to many
questions either.
We don't even have those. Anyway, so in other words, yeah, there's just a lot we don't know yet. And this is a complex area. We're just going to hit some highlights and talk about some things that we think will be of interest to you.
Right, so let me point out, Mike, the legislation is actually 2,000 pages long, and all it does is establish a framework for what's to be implemented by further regulations and laws and enactments that will come in the future. So when you say it's just a starting point and we don't have answers, that is why. It's because despite the 2,000 pages of legislation, it really is the shell of a huge skyscraper.
Kind of astonishing, isn't it? It really is. So anyway, it's going to be interesting to see how this all details out with time. Okay. So as I said, today is December 14th. There's some interesting news that came out today. Maybe you'd like to comment about that for a few minutes as we get started.
Sure. Well, first question I think really would be, is this something to spend our time talking about? And do we really want to learn what all the impacts are and potentially could be, given the fact that yesterday a judge in Virginia ruled that one of the main elements of the legislation is unconstitutional, and that's the mandate that individuals are required to purchase health insurance. Another piece of what was ruled unconstitutional was it ruled unconstitutional? Now, I'm not quite sure how that part fell out, but the other big issue was whether the fines that are being imposed for failure to maintain the insurance are actually taxes and therefore can be levied by Congress, or are not taxes, and if they're not taxes, they cannot be levied by Congress. So yes, this case came out yesterday. It's a huge win for the people who would like to see the healthcare bill repealed, because in order for it to work, we've got to expand the pool of people that are insured, because the healthy and the younger people paying their premiums is going to help offset the costs of insuring and paying for our sicker and more elderly clients. So in order for insurance to work, you have to have a broad-based pool. And if we don't have that mandate to require that individuals get insurance, the people who want insurance are the people who have health problems. The people who feel that they can avoid it are the younger people, the people who are healthy. So that's a really important piece. So this case came out yesterday. There have been a number of cases. This is not the first ruling that's been issued. It is the first ruling that's been issued finding a piece of the law unconstitutional. The other rulings have all held that the law is constitutional. However, these are all still lower court rulings. They will be appealed up to the Supreme Court level. I think the most important case to watch, well, this one, because it did have a finding that there is a portion that's unconstitutional, but the other case to really watch is one out of Florida, and the ruling on that is going to be in the next couple of weeks. There are quite a few states that have joined that legislation that is being heard in Florida, so its impact could be greater. In the end, any invalidation by the courts is going to really have to go up to the Supreme Court for a final answer. So that's one piece of, well, why should we maybe not be learning this now, is because the courts may invalidate it. The other piece that was talked about extensively in November and the first half of December was that with the incoming flush of Republican congressmen who did not support the bill, that there is a likelihood that they will attempt to pass legislation to actually undo either parts of or the entire package. And initially the commentary was that that was very unlikely, because even if they passed the legislation, certainly President Obama would veto it, and in order to overcome a veto, they need a 2/3 vote. And they wouldn't have enough votes to do that. Well, I think that's a very valid point, but I think given what we've seen with Obama's willingness to acquiesce to the demands of the GOP since the elections, with the impending passage of the new tax laws that we may see coming down any moment, I think that it's entirely possible that if the Senate issued legislation that undid portions of the healthcare reform bill, there's a possibility that President Obama would actually not veto it and allow it to go forward. So there's a lot of uncertainty remaining with this bill, but I think in the interim, it's important for us to understand what this bill means to us individually and what it means to us as consumers and taxpayers, because that's the only way that we can provide an informed voice to our congresspeople, who are the ones that are actually going to be making decisions going forward on what to do with this. And I think that that's a critical piece. And the recent studies and surveys have shown that the population still has a very mixed view of the legislation overall. However, seniors and the elderly are actually moving in favor of it. So whereas before it was much more split, they're much more solidly behind this bill at this point. And we'll talk about some of the reasons for that as we go on, because there's a lot of benefits
Yeah.
for our senior population.
Yeah, and well, and not just seniors. We had the thing that came effective actually a little earlier this year, where we can now get children covered under their parents' insurance at work, where they couldn't
Exactly.
for many years. So we'll get into that in a little more detail. So we can speculate, I guess, right and left, but we still have a Democrat majority in the Senate, and not quite. Well, excuse me. So we don't have the majority in the House, and so I just don't know. I don't think it's going to be enough to carry. I think what's going on as far as this tax legislation. Again, this is, here speculating a little bit on this right now, but there's two things. One is that there's still enough of a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate before the end of the year where Obama is hoping that he can move this thing along. The other thing is that there's a big incentive to get this through, because otherwise paychecks are going to be decreasing early next year, and nobody in Congress wants to see that. So that will help in getting this tax legislation through. We'll see. It ain't over till it's over. Okay, well, moving along.
Back to healthcare reform. It's hard not to talk about the tax
Yeah.
stuff because it's just so right on the cusp right now, and
Yes.
it's really a very hot issue. But so is the healthcare reform, and it's really important to all of us.
Yeah. So let's move along. So how is this insurance mandate supposed to work?
Okay, well, the insurance mandate, the requirement that individuals carry insurance, is really a critical piece of the legislation, as I mentioned earlier, because it provides the broad base that makes the insurance viable, so that we can cover the people who are sicker and more frail. So it's a very important piece. The mandate itself is effective in 2014. So it's not effective now. It goes into effect in 2014. And what it says is that all citizens and legal residents of the United States are required to maintain adequate health insurance. So note, it's citizens and legal residents. The bill failed to address one of the key populations that is uninsured and is a huge cost to our medical system, and that would be the illegal immigrants. That's particularly burdensome to California, Arizona, and Texas, where you have really the largest percentage of those populations. So it's going to be a huge issue, I think, for those states to continue to have to deal with those costs and the issues that go along with the uninsured and undocumented clientele that come into the emergency room for services. In addition, there are certain groups that are carved out that are not covered by this legislation. So those they get health insurance through other federal provisions. Those would include American Indians, veterans who are receiving benefits through the VA system, people who are incarcerated, they get their health covered through something through the prison systems. So there are other people who are not included, but otherwise, if you are a citizen or a resident legal of the U.S., starting in 2014, you're required to carry health insurance. Now, how are they going to get all these people covered? Three elements. There's the temporary high-risk pool, there are going to be the exchanges, and there's going to be a huge expansion of the federally subsidized health insurance. So the
Like
temporary,
Medicare, I guess.
exactly.
Yeah.
So the temporary high-risk pool is basically in effect now. It's already been implemented in various states, and it will be available through 2014. The purpose of the temporary high-risk pool is to provide an insurance option for people who are currently uninsurable. If they have been uninsured for 6 months and can document that they cannot obtain health insurance,